Ready, Brad? Welcome. I hope you had a wonderful Shabbos. Tomorrow night is the holiday of Shavuos. Yay. So tonight, hopefully, we're finishing up the book of Nehemiah. And then next week, we're taking off from the Tanakh class. And then the following week, hopefully, we'll be able to begin the book of Tehillim, Psalms, also using the curriculum of the blue edition of the Art Scroll, the Milstein style on the writings. Next week on Sunday, not Saturday night, I'll be teaching, hopefully co-teaching a podcast for the Jewish Pro-Life Foundation. So you can go to their website for more information. Also, I'll post it onto Facebook via the Tanakh Study Group and Tanakh Study Hall page. Okay. If you're not currently on Facebook, I'm not trying to encourage people to use social media if they're blessed to not have to not have to use social media. But if you're on social media anyway, so then we do have a presence on Facebook. So just to be aware. Okay. So Netanya will be doing the translation of the English of the verses, and I'll translate the text of the commentary. Okay. The book of Nehemiah, chapter 13. I'll first read verses 1 through 3. Okay, in the original Hebrew, and then Netanya will translate. Bayom hahu nikra b'sefer Moshe bazneham nimtza kasuv bo asher lo yavo amoni umoavi bighal ha'elohim ad olam. Ki lo kidmu es b'nei Yisrael balechem uvamoyim vayiskor olav es bilum lekalalo vayafoch Elohinu haklala livracha. Vayikasham am es Torah vayav dilu chol erev mi'Yisrael. Okay, please translate the first 3 verses of Nehemiah 13. Netanya, please.
On that day, the book of Moses was read in the ears of the people, and it was found written in it that the Ammonite or Moabite shall not ever enter into the congregation of God to eternity, because they did not greet the children of Israel with bread and with water. And the Moabite king hired Balaam against Israel to curse Israel, but our God reversed the curse into a blessing. So it happened that when they heard the Torah, they separated all the assimilated ones from Israel.
Okay, so I think I'll read a few more verses, and then we'll go on to the commentary. Verse 4 in the Hebrew, V'lifnei mi zeh el yashiv nakohen nasun belishkas beis Eloheinu karov letovia vayas lo lishka gedola v'sham hayu lefanim nosnim esamincha halavona v'akelim umasar hadagan hatirosh vayitzor mitzvahs halavim v'hamashorim v'ashoarim usrumas hakohanim. V'chol zeh lo hayisi b'Yerushalayim. Ki b'shnas 32 la'artachshast melech Bavel basi el hamelech uleketz yamim nishalti min hamelech. Va'avo l'Yerushalayim va'avina v'ra asher asa Eliashiv l'tovia la'asos lo nishka b'chatzrei beis ha'Elohim. Okay, please translate verses 4 through 7. Netanya.
Before this, Eliashib the Kohen relative of Tobias, had been stationed in a chamber of the temple of our God. He prepared a large chamber for Tobiah, where they had formerly stored the meal offering, the frankincense, and the utensils, and the tithe of the grain, the wine, and the oil, which were ordained for the Levites and the singers and the gatekeepers, and the teruma offerings for the Kohanim. Now, during all this, I was not in Jerusalem, for in the 32nd year of
Artaxerxes,
king of Babylonia, I had come to the king. Then at the end of some time, I requested leave of the king. I arrived in Jerusalem and contemplated the evil that Eliashib had done for Tobiah by preparing a chamber for him in the courtyards of the temple of God.
Okay, so now let's look at the commentary on this chapter. So the reason why I wanted to teach this chapter as a standalone is because I knew there was a lot of commentaries we have to cover to really get into this. Okay, so again, using the blue edition of the Art Scroll. First, the introduction to chapter 13. The people had entered the Bris Hamanah, covenant of faith, as in chapter 10, during the reign of Cyrus, or years later during the reign of Darius. And then it's discussed in the commentary, chapter 7, verse 72 or 73, around there. Vowed to refrain from intermarriage, to observe the Sabbath, and to bring the tithes and donations to the temple. With the passage of time, however, intermarriage and Sabbath desecration resurfaced, and the people were remiss in bringing their tithes. Chapter 13 portrays Nehemiah's efforts in dealing with these problems. Bayom Hahu, on that day, Metsudos understands that the day as a reference to the day the wall was consecrated, as in the previous chapter, chapter 12, verse 27. According to Malbim, that day is the day Nehemiah removed the possessions of Tobiah, the Ammonite, from the temple chamber, which is going to be discussed later. Because Tobiah had intermarried into the Jewish community, chapter 6, verse 18, on that day the biblical admonition against marrying Ammonites was read publicly. So remember, Tobiah was the cohort of Sanballat, the Arab. So Tobiah was not Jewish, but he had married into the Jewish tribes.
According to some opinions, he became a Gerim, like was said in the family midrash, the stories of Ezra and Nehemiah.
Right, but what was the problem with him becoming a ger?
It was invalid.
It was invalid. Why? Because he was an Ammonite.
Ammonite.
Right.
He was an
Ammonite, Ammon. As in the first verse of this chapter, they read in the Torah that an Ammonite or Moabite shall never enter in the congregation of God.
He was an unwelcome pest
to eternity. Well, literally, he already proved his the fact that he wasn't righteous, and the fact that he was trying to join with the Arabs to fight against Jerusalem's being rebuilt.
He should have been condemned.
Well,
eternal suffering by God.
Well, he's condemned eternally in the book, so obviously he didn't do himself favors. All right, so let's get back into the commentary. The Sefer Moshe, the book of Moses. This term refers to the book of Deuteronomy, which was spoken by Moses, Malbim. The first four books of the Bible do not appear as statements made by Moses, but as third-person narratives. In the beginning, God created, Genesis 1:1. He called to Moses, Leviticus 1:1. Hashem spoke to Moses in the wilderness, Numbers 1:1, etc. The book of Deuteronomy, however, is written for the most part in the first person. It begins by stating, these are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel, and continues from Moses' personal perspective. Then you spoke up and said to me, Hashem said to me, etc. That's both in chapter 1. Until chapter 31, verse 1, when the form reverts to third person narrative, Deuteronomy is therefore called the Book of Moses. It should be noted, however, that the entire Torah was dictated by God. And this is a quote from the Gemara in Numbers 38. See Ramban's opening statement in the preface to his commentary on the Bible, I guess, for more on this. You had a question?
Oh, sorry, I was yawning.
Okay. Please wait for the scheduled yawning break, which occurs immediately following this broadcast. Okay. All right. So that an Ammonite or a Moabite shall never enter into the congregation of God. Deuteronomy 23:4 reads, "An Ammonite or Moabite shall not enter the congregation of Hashem. Even his 10th generation shall not enter the congregation of Hashem to eternity." I guess God means it, right? So Hashem. So it's so beautiful how the Torah is unambiguous. It gives direct explanation. So Nehemiah had to contend with the problem of intermarriage. The concern was with foreign wives. Here, the concern was with foreign men. You see, so we have someone here, someone who is not really Jewish, trying to be a leader among the Jewish people. That's a problem, right? I mean, it was a much worse situation than the current situation in the secular state of Israel, where you have Arabs in the government, right? Because they're Arabs and they were voted in by Arabs, right? So it's some sort of representation. But here, a guy came in against the will of God and man, and trying to use money to control the Jewish people's destiny. So it just wasn't good. And now he squirmed himself into the holy temple. So if you remember at the beginning of this book, the as they were building the gates of Jerusalem under threat of Sanballat and Tobiah, so they had to hold swords in one hand and built with the other. That's how much fear Tobiah was helping Sanballat the Arab to cause trouble. And this guy's trying to take over the Jewish community from within the Holy Temple. Okay, let's see. All right, now that was all the commentary in verse 1. So let's go to the commentary in verse 2. Kilo kidmu es ben Israel balechem uvamoim, because they did not greet the children of Israel with bread and with water. This follows Deuteronomy 23:5, because of the fact that they did not greet you with bread and water on the road when you were leaving Egypt. Ramban, Deuteronomy 23, verse 5, explains that this accusation is leveled principally against the Ammonites. Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 19. Malbim, however, includes the Moabites as well, in conjunction with their sin in hiring Bilam to curse the Jews. This misdeed might have been condoned had it been motivated by fear of the Jewish military power. However, their failure to bring any tribute in the form of food and drink to the Israelites proved that the Moabites did not really fear them. The deciding factor in hiring Bilam was then not fear, but hatred. Thus, it is the Moabites' failure to bring out food and water that indicates that they are fully culpable for the sin of hiring Bilam. Elsewhere, a commentary says that it was Balak, the leader of the Moabites, did hire them to defend his country out of fear, not out of hatred. So, and then we see that Balak offered sacrifices to God, right? So we see that Balak was actually the nicer one of the Moabites. His people wanted Bilam to be hired for out of hatred. Balak himself personally was not at that level, and so then that's how Balak eventually became the forefather of Ruth from the book of Ruth. because he had offered sacrifices with the good intentions, not just out of hatred of Israel, obviously. You see what I'm saying? So the only way to interpret this Malbim is to say he's only talking about the people of Moab, not Balak, the king of Moab. Ergo, the king of Moab must have been more righteous. Ergo, it explains why his family was the family that gave birth to Ruth. And she, of course, is the great grandmother of King David, and the foremother of Mashiach. So very, very fascinating. God, we spoke about it previously. God takes someone who is less than righteous and makes out of them righteousness. Okay, that person didn't deserve is great. That person was my child, but he didn't serve me. But I'll make of his great grandson or daughter a righteous person, and in that way, the wicked person will be serving me. So God is acting with love, even towards someone who tried to curse the Jewish people, and eventually, even his curses were turned to blessings in the generation of Moses, and his children became a foremother of David, Shlomo, Chizkiah, Mashiach, etc. Amazing. So God is able to redeem the irredeemable and make it into a source of holiness. It's hard to grasp. You have to really think on this the majesty of God. Baruch Hashem. Okay, continuing the commentary on verse 2. And the Moabite king hired Bilam against Israel to curse Israel. Deuteronomy 23:5 continues, and because he hired against you Bilam, the son of Or of Pethor, Aram Naharaim, to curse you. The Moabite king hired the sorcerer Bilam to destroy the Jews by cursing them. See Numbers 22:24. Ramban in Deuteronomy 23:5 explains that the Ammonites and the Moabites owed a debt of gratitude to the Jewish people. The patriarch Abraham had rescued Lot and his daughters, the ancestors of the Ammonite and Moabite peoples, from captivity and death. In addition, Lot and his daughters were spared from the destruction of Sodom and Amorah through the merit of Abraham. While the Ammonites sinned by not bringing out food and water, the Moabites sinned by hiring Bilam. Male Ammonites are forbidden to Jews in marriage because the men would normally greet passerbys with food. The Torah forbids male Moabites to marry Jews because the male is involved in hiring. So, in other words, the women among the Moabites and Ammonites were just not harmful, but the men were proactively cruel and causing trouble and ungrateful. So that's how that's how Ruth became the foremother of the kings of Israel. It's amazing. Okay. But our God reversed the curse into a blessing. This phrase is not relevant to the sin of hiring of Bilam, but it was added to avoid ending the Torah reading with an act of evil. Malbim, however, finds this phrase relevant to the sin. Perhaps the Moabites should be pardoned for hiring Bilam, since he did not in the end curse the Jews. This verse explains that the curse was thwarted only by God's intervention. Since their intentions were deadly, they were not to be pardoned. Yeah. Now, commentary on verse 3. All the assimilated ones, the word Erev comes from ta'arovos, mixture. It refers to non-Jews who had mixed with the Jewish people, as an Erev Rav. Rav. a mixed multitude of peoples. That's Rashi. Our verse refers to the many Ammonites and Moabites who had converted to Judaism and assimilated into the Jewish people. This is both Ralbag and Matsudostav. So they had claimed to be Jews, and but they were never allowed to convert. So it was like a stolen designation. Israel from Israel. Ammonites and Moabites were separated from Israel. It was decided that no Jew would marry them. Ralbag. Sennacherib exiled all the peoples of the biblical world, including the 10 tribes of Israel, into foreign lands, making it impossible to identify the original land of origin of any of the nations. Thus, those emanating from the lands of Ammon and Moab are now permitted to intermarry into the Jewish community, since their true national identity is unknown. Why then were the Ammonites and Moabites separated? Apparently, these were Ammonites and Moabites who had preserved their ethnic identity and were known to not have been among those transferred to some other land. So I guess, in other words, they took pride in being mean people. I mean, what's their legacy, right? They were just
Racist.
no. The legacy was being rude to people who deserve their help and ask for it nicely.
And their legacy was
And remember, the king of Moab allowed the assassination of King David's father and most of his family. So you know, so I mean, perhaps it explains why it was an Ammonite, Tobiah, who became prominent, not a Moabite, because people probably still had a grudge because they slew the family of King David. Okay, commentary on verse 4. Before the separation just described, Matsudas, Ibn Ezra, and Malbim all agree with this. Mitrani, however, interprets that before the completion of the city's walls and the settling of its inhabitants, and then, okay. El Yashiv Nasun Belishkas Beis Eloheinu Karov Latovia. Eliashib, a relative of Tobiah, had been stationed in a chamber of the temple of our God. Eliashib, who was a relative of Tobiah, had placed Tobiah's household effects in a chamber of the temple. We're going to read about that in the next reading, in this chapter. Rimi Trani translates, Eliashib was placed in the chamber of our God's temple close to Tobiah. Tobiah used the chamber of the temple for himself and his family as a dwelling place. Eliashib followed suit and occupied an adjoining chamber. So Eliashib, the Kohen, was now copying the ways of the Ammonite that they allowed to intermarry. And if you look at in the verse 4, before this, Eliashib, a relative of Tobiah, had been stationed in the chamber of the temple of our God. So the girl who married out, who sinned by marrying Tobiah, was a relative of Eliashib. So Eliashib, instead of objecting to the marriage, he followed after the ways of the girl who made that mistake in his family. So pretty sad when you see a leader corrupted because they had love for a relative who did a sin. Especially with temple service. Remember, the very first Kohen Gadol of the Jewish people a full Kohen Gadol was Aaron, and his two eldest sons passed away because they did something wrong as priests. So the Kohanim are they're a case study in ethical behavior, right? So when you have a Kohen who turns his back in the right way, it's really like a painful thing. Matsudas renders Eliashib was Tobiah's close friend. Karov as in close, not Karov as in like the Talmudic Karovim concept of relatives. Uh, he was a close friend, not a relative, uh, who was placed in the chamber of our God's temple. Who officiated in the temple and prepared a chamber for Tobiah. So that would actually make it worse if Tobiah was a relative. So he was weak. He couldn't let go of his like niece or whatever. He loved her too much. So they became friends when they came over for Shabbos or something. Whereas if it was his friend, he went out of his way when Cohen's life is extremely busy, constantly at the temple. He went out of his way to use his precious free time to make friends with an enemy of God. So that's even worse. That's the interpretation of Matsudos. Okay. Okay, so he had prepared a large chamber for Tobiah. Tobiah was a companion of Sanballat, as we saw before, chapters 2 and 3, chapter 4. Okay, and Sanballat and Tobiah ridiculed the Jewish people to reconstruct it when their attempt to reconstruct the city walls and attempted to ambush the builders. He wanted to ambush Jews rebuilding the temple according to God's prophecy, rebuilding the city. And he and his sons had married into prominent Jewish families. He was a powerful, influential person. More about that is in chapter 6. Commentary in verse 5. He prepared for Tobiah. The translation follows Rashi. Eliashib prepared for the chamber for Tobiah, Rashi, by emptying it for Tobiah's use, Metsudos. According to Rimi Trani, Eliashib prepared a chamber for himself, adjacent to Tobiah's chamber. Visham hayu lefanim nosnim, where they had formerly stored. This chamber had been used for the storage of temple objects before Nehemiah came to Jerusalem, Rashi, or before Eliashib emptied the space for Tobiah's use, Metsudos. Hamincha, the meal offering. This refers to the flour for the meal offering, Metsudos. Nowadays, the word is usually used referring to the afternoon prayer service. Halavona, frankincense. Frankincense in Hebrew is lavona. Halavona. This was offered up with the meal offering, as in Leviticus chapter 2, verse 1, and with the showbread, lechem hapanim, in Leviticus chapter 24, verse 7. Metzudos. Mitzvahs halvim, or ordained for the Levites. The tithes, which the people were commanded to give to the Levites, had been stored in the chamber. So, in other words, it discomforted the temple workers from collecting for the Levites to clear a way for the person who had no right to marry into the Jewish people. The singers and the gatekeepers, the functions of the Levites here, Levites are specified here to stress the gravity of Eliashib's transgression. He emptied the chamber of the food needed to support the servants of God, i.e., the singers and the gatekeepers, in favor of Tobiah the Ammonite. Metzudos. Okay, and the commentary in verse 6. Now during all this, while the sacrificial materials and the tithes were being emptied by Eliashib in favor of Tobiah, I was away from Jerusalem. Rashi and Mitzvahs both say this. Ki bishnas shloshim shtayim la'artachshasta melech Bavel basi el hamelech. For in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylonia, I had come to the king. In the king's 32nd year, I returned to him in Babylonia. Mitzvahs Mitrani. So that would mean at the right after he had completed 11 years as the governor of Jerusalem, he returned to the king of Babylonia. He thought he was done being the governor of Jerusalem. Verse 7, in the courtyards of the temple of God. This is a desecration of the sanctity of the temple. Malvum. Okay. All right. So let's see where that commentary was. Okay. So Rabbi Schwab has an interesting commentary. Rabbi Schwab on the books of Ezra and Nehemiah by Art Scroll. At the conclusion of the days, I requested from the king. This is on verse 6. At the conclusion of the days, I requested from the king. After Nehemiah was with the king for a period of time, we do not know how long, a message was sent to the king. It was probably Ezra, for whom the king had the highest regard, who requested permission for Nehemiah to return to Jerusalem. The reason given probably was that things were not going well in Jerusalem in Nehemiah's absence. He was needed there. So, first of all, the logistics of sending a word to Shushan all the way from the Holy Land, it was not an overnight process in those days. And secondly, it would take the idea that Tobiah would be given respect before he was just allowed in the temple. If he was, logically speaking, if he was allowed in the temple the day after Nehemiah left for Shushan, so therefore it wouldn't make sense because the people would outright rebel, right? Instead, they were able to win the hearts of the people because the apparently Eliashib had a chance to lobby that Tobiah was now a supporter of Jerusalem, and whereas before he had been an enemy of the wall around Jerusalem. He always supported the temple, and he donated much to the temple, etc., etc. And so it probably took, I would estimate, a few months for him to sell it, that before he would have the audacity to immediately put Tobiah into the temple. Nobody else was there. The king wasn't there. The high priest wasn't there, right? So then Eliashib went there only after Tobiah had broken the taboo by his own unfounded leniency. So therefore, Eliashib didn't dare go into the temple himself as a private residence, and but once he did the bigger sin, so the littler sin was less of a problem to him. So the Rabbi Schwab's very correct. If Ezra was still living in the Holy Land, and it makes sense he was, then he would have tried to do something. And who do you call? The governor, right? So apparently the person who replaced Nehemiah, and we don't have any any discussion in Tanakh of the governors after Sheshapratzar, who was Daniel, and Zerubbabel and Ezra. So after Ezra, so this is the last um, righteous governor mentioned in Tanakh is Nehemiah, and this is the last chapter of Nehemiah's book. So therefore, we see this is the last year of Nehemiah's reign as governor. He came back for a few months to fix the situation, and then he returned to Shushan afterwards. But this is the conclusion of Nehemiah's reign as governor. So he ended up ruling for 12 years instead of 11. Okay, very interesting insight by Rabbi Schwab. All right, now let's go back into the main text. Starting in verse 8 in the Hebrew. Okay, let's do verses 8 and 9. Vayera li mo'od, va'ashlicha es kol kalei veis tovia chutz min halishka, va'omera va'yetaharu halashachos, va'shiva sham kalei beis Elohim es hamincha va'alavona. All right, Natanya, please translate verses 8 and 9.
This was extremely distressing to me, and I threw all of Tobiah's household articles out of the chamber. Then I gave the order, and they purified the chambers. I returned to it the utensils of the temple of God, the meal offering, and the frankincense.
Very good. Okay. Now the commentaries on verses 8 and 9. So after this, probably we're going to go quicker. It's just the commentaries on these first 9 verses are fundamental to understanding the full extent of this spiritual crisis. And I threw all of Tobiah's articles out. According to Rimi Trani, Tobiah and Eliashib had transgressed by taking one of the temple's chambers for their own use. Since Tobiah had been the first to transgress, he was punished first. Evidently, Rimi Trani's interpretation is that Nehemiah later expelled Eliashib from his chamber, although this is not mentioned clearly in the text. See commentary to verse 9 under the comment, the chambers, plural chambers. Sanballat, although not mentioned by name in this verse, was a member of Tobiah's household. So perhaps he married one of Sanballat's daughters or something. And was also expelled from the temple by Nehemiah. Imagine Sanballat, the leader of the rebellion against the building of the walls of Jerusalem to protect the workers of the temple, was given a home in the holy temple. Now we understand why probably it was Ezra who contacted Nehemiah. I know it's a long trip, but get yourself back here. We gotta deal with this. But it's also, if indeed Rabbi Schwab's interpretation is correct, that it was Ezra, so that means that people were ignoring Ezra, the holy prophet who was on the level of Moses. He was being disregarded politically. How sad, there was no disrespect for a holy prophet of Israel in a long time, not since the days of Jeremiah. So, but Nehemiah was, he was the Mashiach of his generation, potentially, and even though Haggai said that generation wasn't going to have Mashiach, still he was a potential candidate to be Mashiach, so he could get things done. So Ezra knew who to contact, and thank God it worked out. Okay. Okay, so Sanballat and Tobiah had previously been punished for scorning those rebuilding the sacred city. Although they had lost their wealth and great power, they were still influential enough to gain the use of the temple chamber until Nehemiah returned to Jerusalem and had them expelled. That's the Worth and Eimer, the notes to Ritrani, and Mishnah's Rabbi Eliezer. However, it seems to me that a rebel like that would have had to have something to negotiate. Either he had connections to a neighboring country that would have increased potential merchants, mercantile activities, or he still had a stash of money somewhere. Tobiah had some sort of thing where he was able to sell himself as an asset to a vital asset to the fledgling, to the entire Second Temple Commonwealth. Because again, the people are good. They when they're admonished by a strong leader, they immediately repent. So it doesn't make sense to me that Sanballat and Tobiah were penniless. So I would have to disagree with that the commentary we just mentioned. Malbim conjectures that it was to support his action against the criticism of Tobiah's relatives and defenders that Nehemiah arranged for the public reading of the portion of the Torah in verse 1 that stated that Tobiah as an Ammonite could not be accepted into the community. Okay, so that explains it. So he starts chapter with this quote from the Torah. Then he says, I was out of Jerusalem and this is what happened. Now I came back. So that commentary from Malbim is also reminds me like like when I first read the comment by Rabbi Schwab. Very very good guess. These conjectures, I like it a lot. So okay, so Malbim and also Art School says if you're going to study Malbim, check out his commentary to verse 4. Then I gave the order, verse 9, and I said they purified. They removed from the chambers any tame or repulsive items, Matsuda stated. Halashachos, the chambers, they purified 2 chambers, one which had been occupied by Eliashib and one by Tobiah, Ralbach. So it's fascinating. So, and obviously it wasn't Nehemiah personally, but he enabled Ezra to be in charge of it, of the cleansing of the house. And Ezra treated Eliashib's possessions as if they were completely unholy, like Tobiah's, and he was rejected. And because at the very least, it was making it difficult to give out the tithes to the Levites. Torah commandments being interrupted, delayed. It's good to support Torah, not get in the way of Torah. At least allow freedom of it. But in this case, this whole idea of putting anyone there, even if they put Ezra and Nehemiah, it would still would have been messing with the mitzvah, unless they came up with an alternative, right? Like if they built a special warehouse for the tithes right outside the temple, maybe they could get away with saying, "Oh, why should Ezra in his elder years have to walk extra?" Right? There's no escalators back then, right? Etc. So maybe that was explainable, but to interfere with a mitzvah that's opposite of the temple. The temple's not set up to make everything easy, just make all the mitzvahs possible in a good way, and it's an ideal way, and the system works, so it's good to support it. All right, so thank God. So So Nehemiah had retired, but he came out of retirement within a few months, and the people accepted him. So he was a beloved leader. Remember, Nehemiah had done what no one else had done before, right? He had um, given lower tax than the previous governors, even though the previous governors were right, extremely righteous, right? Mashiachs of the generations, Daniel and Zerubbabel. So that we discussed that in the end of chapter 5. Yeah. So we're going to revisit that, the commentary in chapter 5, later on in this chapter. What I want to do now is try to finish up the chapter for the most part, try to go through it, because there's going to be a reoccurring thing that occurs in this book, in this chapter, that touches back on that discussion in chapter 5. So let's try to read through it. Okay, so Natanya is still there?
Yes, sir.
Very good. Okay, we're gonna do from verse 10. Let's read verse 10 through verse 13. Va'eda ki manayos halavim lo nitana vayivrachu ish l'sadehu halavim hamashorim osei hamalacha va'ariva esa seganim va'omera madua ne'azav beis ha'elohim va'ekbetzem va'amidem alamdam v'chol Yehuda heviu masar hadagan v'hatirash v'yitzar la'otzaros v'otzra al otzaros Shelemiah hakohen v'tzadok hasofer v'daya min halavim v'al yadam Hanan ben Zakur ben Matanya kinemanim nechshavu v'aleim lachalok la'achehem. Okay, please translate verses 10 through 13. Natanya.
I then became aware that the Levites' portions had not been given, and the Levites, the singers, and those who performed the services had fled, each to his own field. So I contended with the nobles, and I said, "Why is the temple of God forsaken?" I then gathered the Levites together and established them in their stations. All of Judah then brought the tithe of the grain and the wine and the oil to the storehouses. I appointed as treasurers of the storehouses Shelemiah the Kohen, Zadok the scholar, and Pedaiah of the Levites, and to assist them Hanan son of Zakur, son of Mataniah, for they were considered trustworthy, and it was their duty to apportion the shares to their brethren.
Okay, so most of the Shelemiah, Tzadok, and Bedaiah were all Levites, and then Hanan ben Zakur, ben Matanya, was from another tribe helping. Okay, so now there's interesting. According to Mitsudos, in verse 11, why is the temple of God forsaken? Why is the temple forsaken by the Levites who are supposed to serve at the temple? Mitsudos. However, the verse doesn't actually say Levites. We see that the representatives that Nehemiah himself chose was not only Levites; it also had somebody from another tribe. So too, he may not only be accusing the Levite nobles. It says the nobles. It doesn't say the Levite nobles. So therefore, he contended with all the nobles. He said, by you not objecting to the Eliashiv's placing of Tobiah and Sanballat in the Holy Temple. And then also he taking another chamber that could be used for the Levites away. So they made it difficult to collect for the Levites. And where is the storehouse that was built outside of the temple? At least, even if you're going to force people to carry things for a half mile for nothing, at least there would still be the tithes to the poor. But and so look how look at the holy mind of Nehemiah, right? So he said, why is the temple of God forsaken? If you are no longer collecting alms for the poor, you have forsaken God's temple. Especially in a generation before wire transfers in the bank. The temple was the place to collect money to save the poor. If they allowed this interference in the holy temple, they're forsaking the poor. Therefore, what? How do you expect God to love the temple anymore? It's to be a temple of God. There must be charity. There must be mercy. I think it's more powerful if we say, not like Mitsudos, that we say he was talking to the leaders of every tribe, all the nobles, by allowing a rogue head priest to do what he wanted. It abandoned the temple of God. Its entire purpose was put in doubt. Even if there was holy religion from there, half of religion is how you treat other people. So I think that's the better, at least for the for drasha purposes, for a nice discussion. Okay. All right, let's continue in the text. Zachar li Elohai al zos val temach chasadai. Asher asisi beves Elohai uvemishmarav. Bayamim haim ra'isi bihuda dorchim gitos b'Shabbos. Mavi'im haremos v'omsim al hachamorim. V'af yayin anavim useinim v'chol masa mavi'im Yerushalayim biyom hashabbos va'id biyom michram tzayid va'atzorim yashvuva mavi'im dag v'chol mechar u'mochrim v'shabbos livnei Yehuda u'v'Yerushalayim va'ariva es chorei Yehuda v'omera lahem ma hadavar hara hazeh asher atem osim u'chalim es yom hashabbos Halocho asu avosechem v'yaveh Eloheinu alenu es kol hara hazos val ha'ir hazos v'atem mosifi b'charon al Yisrael l'chalel es Shabbos. Okay, please translate verses 14 through 18.
Remember me, oh my God, for this. Do not disregard my kindnesses that I did for the temple of my God and for its watches. In those days I observed in Judah people treading on wine presses on the Sabbath, and people bringing sheaves and loading them on the donkeys, as well as wine, grapes, and figs, and every burden, bringing them to Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. I warned them on the day they sold their provisions. Also the Tyrians who dwelled there would bring fish and every merchandise and sell them on the Sabbath to the people of Judah and in Jerusalem. So I contended with the aristocrats of Judah, and I said to them, what is this wicked thing that you're doing? Desecrating the Sabbath day. Did not your ancestors do this? And then our God brought all this evil upon us and upon this city. And now you bring additional wrath against Israel by desecrating the Sabbath.
So now previously, when describing in this chapter, okay, okay, so in verse 7, I arrived in Jerusalem, contemplated the evil that Eliashib had done for Tobiah by preparing a chamber for him in the courtyards of the temple of God. So that was called evil. Okay. And over here, what's the description of this sin? Wickedness. Verse 17, so I contended with the aristocrats of Judah, and I said to them, what is this wicked thing that you're doing, desecrating the Sabbath day? So we see that Nehemiah's anger, this validates the perspective I gave before, that Nehemiah was angry about the poor being the poor Levites being cut off from the tithe, not about desecration to the temple directly, because they didn't interfere with the service. It was still orthodoxy of Tanakh in those days, but because it was turning the temple into a less kind place, that was evil. Evil is Ra is related to bad towards people. Wickedness, right? That's related to heaven. So when people do a wicked thing, that's you're doing bad before heaven, right? Okay, so that is if you translate it wicked. All right. So this explains the perspective of the art school translator. If it was wicked. The Hebrew word, however, is ra, evil. So violating Shabbos, according to what Nehemiah actually said, is evil, not wicked. In other words, by reducing Shabbos, the smaller thing was that you're violating Shabbos. The bigger thing is that you're making Shabbos less holy for the entire residents of Jerusalem. It's a wild market place outside, and everybody can hear the sounds of the markets. They have no peace on the Shabbos. That's evil to the people. What again? I digress from the translation here in the art school. It's not wicked; it's evil. See that? But if you look in the Hebrew, in both cases, the Nehemiah is saying it's evil. It's not wicked. It's a bad thing against people more than a bad thing against God. Okay, so let me check the commentary on the translation of verse 17 in other books. Okay, so in Rabbi Schwab's art school book, he said this bad thing. He said it's a bad thing. So rather more general, So it's open to interpretation either way, whether it's towards heaven or people. Maybe you could say Rabbi Schwab is saying it's bad towards both, right? Okay, so Rabbi Rabin, what's his the Tanakh series of art scroll, his commentary on Nehemiah. So that translation is also as wicked. So far I like the Rabbi Schwab translation better. It allows to say it's evil, which is the literal prophecy. I don't know why they're using the word wicked here. Wicked is always related to is as a translation in Tanakh. It's wicked means is connected to Resha, wickedness towards heaven. And evil is connected to the word Ra'ah, bad to people. And here in both cases we're using the word Ra. So therefore both should be considered talking about evil. Both should be considered talking about what's bad to humans first before we discuss what's bad towards heaven. So this bad thing is also the translation by Judaica Press. However, I would not go according to any of these. I would translate it personally. This evil thing. Let's see. Right, Quran. Okay, so this is the Quran from the 1960s version. Then I contended with the nobles of Judah and in Jerusalem and said to them, what evil thing is this that you do and profane the Sabbath day? Okay, Quran gets it according to my translation philosophy. Okay, so at least I have a source for my philosophy, but I it's just, I mean, what can I say? It's like 99% of the time, Ra means wicked. It's translated wicked, and so Ra is translated evil, and Rasha or Russia is connected to wickedness. So okay, all right, prove my point. Whatever. That's just my philosophy on it. It should be translated as evil here too. Okay. All right. And then so now this is fascinating. So that means if you violate the spirit of Shabbos and take away people's oneg Shabbos, their joy of Shabbos, according to my translation, which is allowed for in Judaica Press and Rabbi Schwab's translation, and is explicitly the same as in the Koran original edition. So therefore, taking away a person's Shabbos is just as bad as violating Shabbos. So if you decide you're upset with someone, you go over to their house and scream at them on the Shabbos day. It's like you violated Shabbos. As far as what God is expecting from people, God wants people to be elevated. So even if you kept Shabbos, but you removed somebody else's joy of Shabbos, so I think that's a more powerful lesson. I think that's the literal interpretation of this Tanakh. That's maybe I'm nitpicking, but I think this is a very important concept. And it all fits together. If you're translating it like in like a suggestion, as Quran's original edition copies it. All right. Okay, let's continue in the verses. Trying to make as much headway, and then we'll go back to the correlation between this chapter and chapter 5 after we finish all of the verses in this chapter. Okay. All right. So now we're going to verse 19. There's a total of 31 verses. Yeah, 31 verses in this chapter. So I might be reading through it just so we can make headway, and then we'll double back in comments. All right, here we go. Vahika sher salalu share Yerushalayim lifnei ha-Shabbos. V'omra v'yisagru Hadalassus v'omera asher lo yiftachum ad achar hashabbos min orai hamadti al hasharim lo yavo masa b'yom hashabbos lo yalinu harochlim umochre chol mimkar michutz l'Yerushalayim pamu shtoim v'ida v'hem v'omra alehem madu atem lenim neged hachoma im tishnu yad eshlach v'chem min ha'es hahi lo va'u b'Shabbos. V'omra l'Levim asher yihiu mitarim uva'im shomrim hasharim l'kayim es yom haShabbos. Gam zos zocher li Elohai v'chusa alai karov chastecha. Gam b'yamim hahem ra'isi es Yehudim hoshivu nashim ashdodios Amanios, Moavios, Uvenehem Chatzi Medaber Ashdodis, Ve'enam Makirim Ledaber Yehudis, V'chilshon Am Va'am, Va'ariv Imam, Va'akalim, Va'ake Mehem, Anashim Ve'emretim, Va'ashbiem, Belohim, Im Titanu V'nosechem, Livenehem, Vim Tis'u mibnoseham livnechem v'lachem. Halo al eila chata Shlomo melech Yisrael. V'agoyim harabim lo haya melech kamohu v'ahuv lelohav v'haya. Vayita nehu Elohim melech al kol Yisrael. Gam oso hechetu hanashim anachrios. V'lachem hanishma lasos eis kol hara hagadola hazos. All Beloheinu lahoshiv nashim nachrios umibnei Yoyada ben Eliashiv hakohen hagadol Chasan v'Sanbalat hachoroni v'avri chehu me'alai zachar lahem Elohai al galei hakavuna avaris hakavuna v'alavim tihartim Mikol nechar va'amida mishmaros lakonim v'lalavim ish b'malachto v'lakorban ha'itzim be'itim zumanos v'labikurim zachar li Elohai latova. Okay, Natanya, please translate 19 through the end of the chapter.
It happened when the gates of Jerusalem cast shadows before the Sabbath that I spoke the order, and the doors were closed, and I spoke the order not to open them until after the Sabbath. I stationed some of my servants at the gates so that no burden could come in on the Sabbath. So the merchants and the sellers of every merchandise lodged outside Jerusalem once and then a second time. I warned them and said to them, "Why do you lodge across from the wall? If you repeat this, I will send a force against you." From that time onward, they did not come on the Sabbath. Then I told the Levites that they should regularly purify themselves and come as guards of the gates to sanctify the Sabbath day. This too remember for me, O my God, and be compassionate toward me according to your abundant kindness. Also in those days I observed the Jews who had married Ashdodite, Ammonite, and Moabite wives. Half their children spoke Ashdodian and did not know how to speak the language of the Jews, and likewise with the language of each nation. So I contended with them, and I cursed them. I beat some of their men and tore their hair out. I made them swear by God that you not give your daughters over to their sons, nor marry their daughters to your sons or to yourselves. I said, did not Solomon king of Israel, sin with such women? Among the many nations there was never a king like him. He was beloved by his God, and God appointed him king over all of Israel. Yet the alien wives caused even him to sin. Shall we then listen to you to do all this great wickedness, to be unfaithful to our God by marrying alien wives? One of the sons of Joiada, son of Eliashib the Kohen Gadol, was a son-in-law of Sanballat the Horonite, so I drove him away from me. Remember then, oh my God, for their descendants of the priesthood.
Desecrations. Desecrations.
Okay. Remember them, oh my God, for their desecrations of the priesthood and of the covenant of the priesthood and of the Levites. And so I cleansed them from all that is alien, and I established the watches of the Kohanim and of the Levites, each one according to its task, and for the wood offering at scheduled times, and for the first fruits. Remember me, O my God, for good.
May we all be blessed to be remembered in a good way. But it's helpful if we do mitzvahs. It's easier to do the commandments, and then God, makes us remembered for good. Sure.
Now, why does this art scroll English Tanakh not have Hebrew names? Because it's hard for me to know how to say them because they're like Englishized.
It's just a decision art school made in the 70s when they started the Tanakh series, the white edition of commentaries. They started to do it with using the the Latin names as like you could find in any kind of Bible. But yeah, I don't mind. I don't mind an actual transliteration of names. It's good to have a balance, if you like transliteration of names, so the Quran does have that, but it makes it harder if you're from a background where you learned, uh, uh, the regular standard translations that have the Latin words. So then you have to, study and get used to the. If you could read Hebrew, so then you could have a it makes it everything becomes easier if you can read Hebrew, because then you could read the original translation in the Hebrew, and you realize the Hebrew is actually easier than the English. But so that's beautiful. So I think Nehemiah did wonderful things. He removed the enemies of God from the temple, and uh, strengthened the observance of Shabbos, and um, then he removed the it was like a reinstitution of the problems that Ezra had fought when he was younger. The scourge of intermarriage came back, and Nehemiah effectively stopped them. So let's see the commentary. Um, so commentary on 25, that they were the lashes were according to of course according to the law. So Rashi, following the Talmud Mod Cotton 16a, explains the lashes were given as a warning and as a reminder of the severity of the sin. When egregious Torah desecration is rampant, the rabbis may inflict as many lashes as they deem necessary for the situation at hand. According to Rabbah, however, the men were given the 39 lashes prescribed biblically for the willful translation of a biblical commandment. Yeah. All right. So now, let's see. Is there any other? interesting topics I wanted to cover before I get sidetracked. All right. So just an interesting point in verse 24, half their children spoke Ashdodian, right? So after the exiles by Sennacherib and the Babylonians, so Ashdodian spoke Ashdodian. They did not speak Philistine. You see that? So we have a historical record recorded in Tanakh that the Philistines were already disempowered. Now today Ashdod is part of Israel, of course, but just Ashdod was one of the 5 capital cities of the Philistine Empire. So the fact that they had their own derivative dialect, it was no longer called the Philistine because of all the exiles. Starting with Sennacherib, there was a philosophy: if you take people out of their homeland, they won't be as patriotic and they won't be likely to rebel. So the Syrians just mixed up where everyone's background. It became extremely difficult to follow where people's originated from. Well, for the good thing that came out of it, though, for people who want to convert from a nation such as Moab and Ammon, that's okay. You could convert a man from those nations if he comes from a country where you can't tell for sure which country he comes from. So if, for example, the Ammonites were exiled to Europe, and someone from Europe was a descendant of the exiles, right, of Ammon, and they wanted to convert to Judaism, we don't test them for DNA and stuff. We just accept them because they're no longer under the classification of the nation of cruel people that Moab and Ammonites became nefarious, the infamous for. So God has a way of purifying peoples. So just imagine somebody born to a wicked family has the potential now to be to pursue full righteousness is necessary, and that's really amazing. The guy did that. It's just again another sign of God finding a way to bring holiness in the world through the unrighteous forefathers became forefathers of righteous descendants. You understand? So it's really amazing. Okay, so now the concept, I don't know if you noticed, but 3 times in chapter 13, a questionable activity was occurring. Okay, the 3rd time is recorded. So let's see. So the 3 times are. Okay, chapter 13, verse 14. Remember me, oh my God, for this. Do not disregard my kindnesses that I did for the temple of my God and for its watches. Okay, so he said, Nehemiah says, remember me, right? Then here in verse 22, it says, then I told the Levites that they should regularly purify themselves and come as guards of the city to sanctify the Sabbath day.
Well, that was
This too. Let me finish. Let me finish. This too, remember me, for me, oh my God, and be compassionate towards me according to your abundant kindness. And then third, the last verse is and for the wood offering at the scheduled times and for the first fruits, remember me, oh my God, for good. 3 times Nehemiah asks that God remember him. Okay. You had a question before we continue?
Yeah, I'm sorry for interrupting you, but
It's okay, son. What's your question?
As you know, in the
Do you need a few minutes to collect your thoughts? Let me get back to this.
as you know, in the Midrash,
Mhm.
Ezra did make not Ezra. Nehemiah made the huge mistake of asking Hashem to remember him, right?
Right, we
So
studied
why
that.
did he still do it?
Right. Well, exactly. So he made that mistake in chapter 5, and then he says it 3 times in this chapter, right? But he did it differently in chapter 5. Okay, so now the remember me for good in chapter 13. I don't. I mean, it doesn't seem so bad what he said. I mean, I I did these mitzvos. Maybe he was concerned. I don't know if I did it perfectly, but remember me for good, even if I made mistakes along the way. Like for example, there's no Torah commandment to pull people's hair out. Maybe he was a little concerned. If I made any mistakes along the way, the alternative was much far more grim than if I did nothing. So remember me for good. So I can understand why he was trying to confirm that God would accept his offering. However, his comment at the end of chapter 5 is troubling, and the Gemara quotes calls it out. So in chapter 5, verse 19, remember in my favor, O God, all that I did for this people. Zachar li Elohai latova kol asher asisi al ha'am hazeh. Okay, so now why is this one different from the others? Because in the others, I did this and this. Oh, please remember me for good. It sounds like okay, so he was worried maybe he didn't do a mitzvah right. So he was just trying to show that he loves the mitzvah, and even if he didn't do it perfectly, at least it should be known publicly that he loved the mitzvah that God gave him. So that's good. It's encouraging people to have altruistic intentions, right? However, the one in chapter 5, 19 is a problem. Remember in my favor, O God, all that I did for this people. So one and the article in verse 19, chapter 5. One opinion in Sanhedrin 93b asserts that Nehemiah was punished for this request by deletion of his name as the author of his book. See commentary to verse 15. Although remember me, Hashem, when you showed me your people favor, David's request was acceptable, since he called on God to exercise mercy and remember his good deeds. And that's according to Psalm 106:4 is exactly the way Nehemiah wrote chapter 13. Nehemiah, however, erred in thinking that his good deeds in themselves made him deserving of merit, even without God's compassion. No man may justifiably make this assumption, and for this Nehemiah was punished. So our source says, see Maharsha, Anaf Yosef, in Ein Yaakov. Okay, it goes on. Yes. But so this understanding in Sanhedrin, Nehemiah was punished. So let's just understand it outside. The book of Nehemiah was considered the last 13 chapters of the book of Ezra. The book of Ezra was 23 chapters long in the days of the Talmud. So if you look in the Gemara and Sanhedrin, which talks about the author of each book, was it whether it was whether Moses wrote it or Jeremiah wrote it or the men of the Great Assembly wrote it, etc. So it mentions that Ezra wrote the book of Ezra. However, we studied previously that really Nehemiah was personally the scribe for the men of the Great Assembly for much of the works of Ezra and Nehemiah. Ezra was the chief editor of these books, but Nehemiah was the chief transcriber, at least of the. Now in Holy Writ, the transcription is the prophecy. The prophecy occurs, and the prophet writes it in real time. So Nehemiah was a major contributor to the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, but his name was deleted as far as he's not mentioned as a co-author of the book of Ezra, and his book of Nehemiah was, at least rabbinically, for some it was probably around 1,000 years. The book of Nehemiah was called the book of Ezra among Jews. Only when they had to combat, the people who like the Christian debaters and people trying to misquote the Tanakh. So they had to quote chapter numbers that were used, for example, in the King James Bible, to be able to relate in the mind of the audience which verses they were talking about. They couldn't say the book of Ezra chapter 20, right? According to the King James, there's no chapter 20 of the book of Ezra. According to the Talmud philosophy, so the book of 20 chapter Ezra will be the book of chapter 10. Chapter 20 of the book of Ezra will be chapter 10 of Nehemiah. Okay, so now why was he punished? Okay, why was he punished that for 1,000 years the sages of Israel called his book the book of Ezra? Now, of course, it's mitigated. We see effectively, and I read this in the commentary somewhere, God forgave Nehemiah after, and that's why he merited to have his book called Nehemiah again. But the problem was, let's again look at the verse 19 in chapter 5. Remember, my favor, oh my God, all that I did for this people. He didn't say, remember, my favor, God, like King David, um, remember, whenever, please think of mercy whenever you're thinking of the good I did. He's saying, well, what's an alternative? What would be a better way? According to those who are criticizing Nehemiah here, what would be a better way for Nehemiah could have put it? He could have put it, for example, so remember in my favor, oh my God, all that I was blessed to do for your people according to your will. Right? That would be one thing. Or please remember me in favor of my God, and accept my thanks that you allowed me to participate in all the good that you did for your people. Something more humble. The phrase all that I did for this people, every good thing we do is with God's help. When we're doing for God's people, and God is, if we're trying to represent God as the king of the world, right? So a Jewish leader should understand they're only a messenger for God. They're only an assistant to God's plan. They're not doing the mitzvah. Now, normally, you do a behavior, you have a reward. You do a sin, you have a sin. You do a good behavior, you have a good reward. But if someone's representing the kingdom of heaven, so therefore they cannot attribute that to themselves. So this is the problem that caused 1,000-year lapse in the honor from the rabbis of Israel towards Nehemiah, because he said all that I did for this people. What about God? Right? So, like, just like a country was gonna. Here's a parable. A country was gonna attack a country, and then a strong president sent a emissary, whether Secretary of State or ambassador. Someone went to the other country, and they said, "You do this, and we're going to attack you," and they prevented a war, right? So that ambassador should not, boast. Oh yeah, I stopped the war. He was only a messenger for God, right? In the parable, it was messenger for the president or leader of that country who prevented the violence from escalating. Right? What did he do? Only because he was a representative did he have any connection to it whatsoever, any power to do anything. So because it was in the capacity as a representative of God, as a king of the Davidic dynasty should be, and he was given the political governorship of the state by the controlling country of Persia. So therefore, it was upon Nehemiah to reduce his role in his speech of describing his role when talking to God. This was not. Remember previously we discussed Nehemiah sometimes would have to make a comment in his writings with a mind that the kings of Persia are going to read this. Nevertheless, he's representing God. You're going to be God's representative. God comes first. It's just the way it is, right? So the same Nehemiah, who was very diligent to defend the Sabbath day, should have also been very diligent to defend God's honor as the chief executive of his good deeds, right? If not for the fact God made him born into the house of David, right, etc. All of the factors involved. God didn't make him the leader. God didn't give him the capacity to motivate people, etc. All this stuff. So he couldn't have done any of them whatsoever. So, but in truth, if a person realizes it, and like the verse, "Al tashlecheni le'esdik," no, don't abandon me in my old age, in the time of my old age. So there's a humility expected, and David HaMelech was very good with that. It was natural for him. So that was expected from a scion of David to answer in a humble way. Don't try to take credit for God's work. Chapter 5, verse 19. Remember in favor of my God, all that I did for this people. Well, again, it would have been better if he said, "Thank you for allowing me to do good to participate in when you did good for my people in all the ways that you did in these days." Something like that. You see what I'm saying? Any questions? Any questions? Please unmute your mic if you have a question. All right, very good. Thanks for learning the book of Nehemiah with me. Okay, again, in 2 weeks we'll, God willing, hopefully start the book of Psalms, and next week is on Sunday we'll be on a podcast for the Jewish Pro-Life Foundation. But the next Tanakh class, God willing, Saturday night in 2 weeks, on hopefully the book of Psalms, if God desires. Okay, we're just doing shlichus for him, trying to participate in his plan. So it requires a teacher, it requires a student, and so I can only teach the way I teach. So it's the ways you guys are learning changes it. If more than just a background noise while you're doing one of your favorite hobbies. So if you're actually learning something, so then you're elevating this class. So hopefully it is effective. And if you like the content, please share it, and subscribe is nice, but share the content, the links, etc. And live according to Hashem's holy word. I mean, Hashem is wonderful, and we just see more and more beautiful things about the way God does things as we learn together. So I hope we can continue to do so. All right, thank you, and God bless. Let's pause here. Bye, be well.
Bye. Thank
Happy
you.
Shabbos.
Right.
We're gonna end already?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Bye, be
you.
well.
Good night.